Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Very excited to have Kristi Leigh. She's in the virtual green room right now. Producer is taking a nap. So all of the stars, I feel, are aligning for a very successful live stream. Quick order of business before we get started. As I always say, that if you are watching this after the live stream has ended, it is going to be shortened for YouTube, and the entire live stream is going to be on places like ROKFIN, where we should be live now. So let me know if we're not live on ROKFIN, if you're watching this on ROKFIN. Locals, it's going to be on Locals. My Patreon account's going to have it. It should be on ODYSEE, but the entire thing will not be on YouTube. And again, that is because I would love for people to inconvenience themselves just a little bit to go to another platform where we're not going to be suppressed. And, you know, today's live stream, I think, is a really great example of that because Kristi, we're going to be talking about her going on YouTube's Most Wanted show. InfoWars AJ, as we all call him on YouTube, because we know that he was one of, if not the biggest name first to get booted from YouTube. And so I think, we're taking a gamble talking about this today, and we'll see if YouTube allows it to stay up. But Kristi's got a lot of really important things to say, and I just don't like to play the self-censorship game, which is why I put InfoWars in the title, because screw it. You know, I just like, at some point, you're just playing a cat and mouse game, and if I get booted, I get booted. That's just how it's going to be. There are other platforms out there. But anyway, that's just a disclaimer. So, I'm going to bring Kristi in right now. Here she is. Welcome.
Hello.
This is your wedding weekend, so we should all be very honored that you're here.
1 week left to go. Yes. That's correct.
Oh, it's next weekend.
Next weekend, Sunday.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say that would be really committed. Really committed to the cause.
But bear in mind, I just moved from California like 5 days ago, and now I'm scrambling to throw this wedding together. So yeah, it's exciting times.
And do you mind telling us, you moved from California, do you mind telling us where, or are you just you want to just say on the East Coast, or where did you decide to settle?
Well, I mean, my hometown is in the Toledo, Ohio area, which borders Michigan. So Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan is my hometown. And I had moved across California to take this anchor gig in March of last year when the pandemic broke out. So it was great timing.
I know. I am kind of, I'll say this probably later when we start talking about it. I'm kind of a little jealous that you got to experience the newsroom during COVID, because I fortuitously quit about 4 months before it was really a thing. And I know it probably would have ended my career, I think, because I would have had a very, very difficult time dealing with the stuff that we're going to talk about today that you talked with Alex about. And you have so much to, I think, share that's really valuable for people, especially now we're all talking about Ivory Hecker. We'll get to that in a second. She's the one who worked with Project Veritas and talks a little bit about, you talked about hydroxychloroquine, and that was it seems like that was the center of what she was concerned about as well. So there's a lot of these things are sort of aligning. What I want to play first, and we'll just kind of get right into what you told Alex was your breaking point. I'm going to play this quick clip, and let's see here if I can. I just want to make sure that I get this. Okay, I'm going to play this, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, Kristi? So here we go.
So your breaking point, and then we'll go back into the stuff that led to that, but the breaking point, the medical information.
That was the breaking point for me, especially with my personal doctor in California. When I had a personal Zoom appointment with him, I just asked him frankly, how have you been approaching COVID-19? And he's like, oh, hydroxychloroquine. And I was like, wow. And you're not getting pushback from that, and he's like, no, I've used it for so long and for different things, and my patients are better the next day. And so this is my own personal experience with my own personal doctor who is saying that he was using it. And so the fact that it was being just shut down and doctors were not allowed to talk about it. And then you see months later, the redemption of the fact that the Lancet article, the New England Journal of Medicine, all had to do retractions. The Facebook Oversight Board Committee had to do a retraction on this drug that other journalists were cheering on, like, no, that's misinformation. And so that is what's frustrating, is we're not supposed to be taking a position. Well, how about we just deliver what these doctors are saying, say other doctors.
I'm going to pause it there. So let's go right into this topic of what led to the sort of end of things, and how you ended up getting out of TV news. And then maybe we'll backtrack a little bit and go to why you wanted to get into TV news in the first place. But I think we'll start with the end. We'll let everybody have dessert first today. So would you walk us through that, Kristi?
Well, about this hydroxychloroquine issue, something that Ivory had said herself was that she wasn't advocating for the drug. I was not advocating for the drug either. I was advocating for both sides to be heard, which I believe every journalist should do. It's one of the tenets of journalism. Why do we choose to uphold certain experts? And there's that general term that we use for everything in news, experts, and not hear from others that have a specialization in this field. It's so tied, this hydroxychloroquine issue is so tied with the censorship issue. I think it was the first major slap in the face that things were just getting pulled down and censored. And what was so strange about it is my hometown, or the last station I had been at, there were a couple of journalists there that were cheering on this censorship and calling it misinformation. But you dug into stories that had just been done weeks ago. And in those stories, it says that the person had suffered through COVID-19 and they were treated with hydroxychloroquine and improved. Now, all of a sudden, we're saying it's dangerous and we can't even talk about it. So it's just these extremes that I find frustrating over the past year. Everything was so extreme, mass generalizations. Even in the critiques of myself and Ivory, it's always mass generalizations. Like, so since her personal doctor used it, then that's why, she's advocating for it. One, I'm not advocating for it. And two, that is not the only example that I have. So you pick one little thing to try and critique. And I mean, that's what's just so frustrating. I'm trying to get away from these mass generalizations, even with her. And I don't know how you feel, Allison, when you have these concerns about censorship or the direction of journalism, does that mean that you or I suddenly think poorly of every journalist we've ever worked with, every station we've ever worked for? No, we have concerns about particular directions, particular problems. And so we just need to stop with these just mass generalizations.
It's always fascinating to me that behind the scenes, at the work parties, at the bars, journalists are the first people to complain about how terrible things are in the industry right now. Stuff that didn't get shared, say, in this Project Veritas's latest expose with Ivory, is the little amount of time and resources that the average, even well-meaning journalist has to do their job nowadays. I was a multimedia journalist, meaning, for people that don't know, I was shooting and editing all of my own stuff, which meant I was driving the car. And this was in Seattle, in one of the largest markets in the country, where if I had wanted to go network afterwards, I could have. And here I was shooting and editing all my own stuff. I have friends that were working for the network that are shooting and editing all their own stuff. You have 3 hours to really understand what you're talking about, and you're expected to kind of be an expert by the end of the day, when you really are not, especially if it's a complicated topic. I think in a large part, that's why a lot of times it sort of bleeds, it leads. Laziness continues, because we know that we can get that on TV by 4 or 5 o'clock. Whereas if you have a complicated topic, it's just sort of, we don't really want to touch that. Or if we do go after it, we botch it in a lot of ways. And journalists will admit that to each other. But then, to the face of the public, it's like, no, we know what we're talking about, and we need to censor this information. We know hydroxychloroquine should not be discussed because it's unproven, or this or that or whatever else, assuming that they, I guess, have more knowledge than the doctors that they want taken off of television or off of Facebook, which is totally bizarre. Like, you're somebody who's been reading the New York Times and you think you know more than an MD who's been practicing for 30 or 40 years, which is weird. But again, like you said, yeah, they'll talk about it behind the scenes. And yet then when those of us say this to the public, like, these are all the problems, and they're like, what are you, just a cranky, whiny, curmudgeon, where you just don't like your job and you want to take the rest of us down? And I think that's unfortunate, because I think this is really the place where it has to, the regaining of trust of the public is going to have to start, is just explaining to people why things have gone awry. There are definitely more sinister parts to it, of course, but if you don't at least first take responsibility for your failures, then like where in any relationship, whether it's the relationship with the public that news has, or the relationship with your, your husband or your kid or whatever else, like how do you move forward? Have you been hearing from, your former colleagues or peers about your speaking out to Alex Jones? I mean, that was a pretty ballsy move for your first, outing.
Well, let's go ahead and address that head on then.
Yeah.
I love how when you do get criticism, they'll be like, oh, well, she lost all credit because she went on InfoWars. Same thing with Ivory Hecker. Oh, well, she lost all credit by going on Project Veritas.
Right.
I mean, but for me, it was a very intentional decision because I was making a point. One of my biggest issues that I was just shocked and appalled with was just this cheering on of censorship. I mean, for journalists, I think that we should be for freedom of the press, freedom of the speech. And maybe it's not always directly related to that because, okay, you get into the like, okay, well, these are companies and they can make the choices, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, the underlying issue is that when we're already in a society that's arguing with each other and is so divisive, what we need more of is more discussion. For people that are angry, that feel like they can't trust the news or they can't get the information they're asking for, there's going to be suspicion. And when you shut down topics, that's only going to raise suspicion. So if you give us the freedom to at least explore these topics, then that can increase trust, like you were talking about. So as far as my intentional decision to go on there, here's a situation where this man is the most banned, the most censored, of all the internet, but he has a massive global reach in spite of it. Why is that? Well, part of it is because there are people that are thirsty for just hearing other sides. For me, I am independent. I do like to get the big picture. And so I always tried to approach these major divisive topics in a manner of where I was getting, obviously, your traditional main news, but then I would read some things that lean right, some things that lean left, and then I would also consume independent news through podcasts, through other situations like that, independent news. So that way, I'm at least getting a big picture. But to cheerfully only consume what you know in your heart that you agree with, like, how are you growing your understanding of that? How are you able to have meaningful conversations to seek the truth? So I was intentional because I wanted to make a point about just how appalled I was with this traditional cheering on news, but cheering on of censorship. And I went on the most censored platform to discuss this. But these criticisms are so tired, and we've talked about propaganda. It is classic propaganda. What do you always hear when you hear about the criticism of Project Veritas? You hear selective editing. It's just like, that's not your own thought, because that's the narrative. What are you now hearing with AJ? It's like, oh, Sandy Hook, like everything boils down to that. So it's very like, get an original thought. Otherwise it's very clear that you're just taking the controlled narrative.
It is definitely at a point, perhaps this is nothing new, but it's definitely at a point among journalists when looking at the defectors, whether that's a journalist who has defected or it's just a doctor or somebody else, somebody that's sort of running rogue against the mainstream narrative, that the character assaults seem to lead the way. Michael Yaden, he was the former VP of Pfizer, has been talking to independent podcasts about his concerns over the COVID vaccines. And this is a guy who ran a major pharmaceutical company for a long time. And, one of the headlines I read about him was that he's become a hero of the anti-vaxxers. And that's basically, that's what they lead with. You don't even get past the headline. Like, if you're somebody, oh, I guess he's an anti-vaxxer, when the guy ran a pharmaceutical company for many, many years. Like, there's no way you can argue that. But he's a hero of the anti-vaxxers or whatever else. And, instead of debating the points he's making, all of a sudden, you just end up throw it out to the side. Okay. I want to get to why you wanted to get into journalism in the first place. But first, I have to give a shout out to my new sponsor, Bonner Wine. I have been talking about them this last week because if you guys like wine, high altitude Malbec from Argentina, this is basically the package you get, 50% off with my promo, which is AllisonWinePromo.com, AllisonWinePromo.com, and you get 50% off shipping as well. And one of the reasons I decided to work with them is because, besides the fact that I'd mentioned before and they saw that this is my favorite kind of wine, is the health benefits. I've had actually doctors on my channel before. I did just media analysis talking about antioxidant properties of these because they are some of the highest vineyards in the world and have a lot of antioxidant properties. Resveratrol, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Kristi. Have you heard about that? Resveratrol?
Sorry, no.
Anyway, so check them out. It's AllisonWinePromo.com, AllisonWinePromo.com. And again, 50% off shipping. One of the Malbecs comes from the third highest vineyard in the world. And another thing that's cool about these wines too is because they're raised at such a high altitude, fewer pesticides. They also put no dyes, no additional chemicals, that kind of stuff. So check them out. Bonner Wine, AllisonWinePromo.com. Okay. And yes, the czar says because you like booze. And that's true. I do like booze. But I would like to feel healthy about my booze. And yeah, Daniel, great for cooking too. Sure. It's great for drinking while cooking, which is great. And okay, yeah, Mark. Sign her up, excellent guest, brave enough to appear on Jones with a point, which is so true. And I don't know, maybe you had to drink wine before you won an Alex Jones.
That was very spontaneous decision, first of all. Second of all, going back to the character assassination quality of everything nowadays, as far as appearing on that, I don't hold him to the same standard of traditional journalism that I do mainstream. So of course I'm not appearing and saying like, this is true journalism. I mean, come on, that's absurd. I explained why I appeared on that show, and I'm not going to hold him to the same standard because he's very open about that. He's sharing his opinion and that it's not like your classic journalism. What I have a problem with is stations that are saying and presenting themselves as fair and unbiased and not having any advertisement control or anything like that, and it's just blatant that's not true. And what about these traditional mainstream situations? Where's the criticism there? You know, I mean, obviously there was some making fun of Brian Williams. This is a man that is supposed to be like the pinnacle of traditional journalism, right? But we all know what happened there with his misrepresentation of the truth. And then we have the latest with CNN having their legal analyst back on that was caught doing a naughty thing, we'll say, on Zoom, and we're not like holding that to the same standard or saying how extra appalling that is, because this is supposed to be traditional mainstream media, but we're now giving a free pass and cheering that on. I mean, and then you have someone like Don Lemon, who I saw with my own eyes saying, I'm a journalist. Are you though? Or are you a commentator? You know, this is another problem that we as journalists have, is we get thrown in with people that are clearly opinion columnists, essentially. And, you know, you'll have someone like him say that he's a journalist, but I mean, are you? I mean, same thing with Tucker. Tucker Carlson on the other side, would you consider him a journalist, or is he a host that is sharing his opinion? I mean, let's be more specific about how we're defining these roles so that we have the proper expectations, if that makes sense. And when you are going to character assassinate someone like you, someone like me, someone like Ivory Hecker, are you criticizing what we're saying now, or are you criticizing how we presented the news before? Because I'm happy to challenge anyone to find any news story that I did for the news where I was taking a position in that. So like, attack the message all you want, but like this, it's so silly, these like character assassinations.